the sharpest tool in the shed, although when they even let me out of the shed. Yeah, Brian, I see that nonverbal communication there. That was communicated very loud and clear. So bear with me if I miss something. In terms of policies within the plan that really promote voluntary, incentive, proactive, reaching out to homeowners, maybe I missed it. And I mean, I understand, you're regulators. That's the language you speak. You like to have rules. You like to have things you can check off. You like to have quantifiable things. And when you have a rule and somebody has to do something, it's easy to see if they did that and you can check it off. That said, and so I get that. I get that. That's where you're coming from. But the more that we can do things that people can do right now. I can report that the home remodeling business is going gangbusters. That's a brand new window behind me. And getting a contractor lined up to do stuff right now is a challenge. But the point is, people are staying put. There's an opportunity really to, strike while the iron is hot and people are at home, to incorporate some energy efficiency stuff into what they're doing. So that's just a quick little diatribe. And then just real briefly, take any kind of mandatory time of sale requirement out of your plan immediately. And Megan, you and I exchanged things a little bit. Any mention that it's a possibility is, we can either go down a positive path in terms of, partnership stuff, or we can spend a lot of bandwidth fighting a mandate. So just throwing that out there, would encourage you to take any kind of time of sale triggered action out of the plan now. So that's just, our dog in the fight. And I don't want to say our dog in the fight, but maybe I should say our dog in the potential partnership. And Steve, thanks again for convening this group. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Megan, did you want to comment or anything about that, or any response?
Maybe can you all hear me all right? I was having some problems with my sound a little earlier. So
yeah, we can, but it's low. Yeah.
Let me try. I just want to make sure that you can hear. Let me try switching to my AirPod microphone. Let's see. Is this any better? Or is it about the same?
It's the same. Yeah.
I apologize. Let me know if I need to repeat myself at all, or we can sort it out. I'll try to get a better microphone. But I don't know if it'd be worth me just giving a quick overview of some of the actions we've identified for your group to look at. And then we can get into the discussion, or if you just wanted to dive right into the discussion. And thank you for your comments, David. I noted.
We have a small group here, so I'm not sure what they would like to see. I've read it, looked it over, so I'm not sure what the other folks think. But if you'd like to do that, maybe it would be good to start there. So.
Sure. I see Jan talking, I think.
Jan, we can't hear you. Sorry, you're muted.
So I was also involved in the original climate action plan. And what I remember from it is that a great portion of our pollution comes from the two freeways, 580 and 680. And I wonder how that has changed, what percentage that we have completely no control over. So I was wondering how that factors into this current plan.
Sure, I can speak to that a bit. So transportation is our biggest sector of emissions here in town. On-road transportation accounts for about 56% of all the emissions. But in terms of the freeways themselves, it really only gets counted against our emissions, and the way we've calculated it, it's the trip of origin starts in Pleasanton, ends in Pleasanton, or both starts and ends in Pleasanton. So if it starts in Pleasanton and ends in, let's say, San Jose, we would only get half the credit for those emissions. for the starting portion. And then same thing, if a trip starts in San Jose and ends in Pleasanton, we would take half of the emissions there. But anything that's just passed through on the freeway is actually not counted against us in this in our emissions. However, transportation is still our biggest sector.
May I ask a question? May I ask a question? Granted, you can measure the pollution coming off the freeways, but how do you determine that a trip has an origination in Pleasanton and a destination someplace else, as opposed to somebody driving from Lathrop to San Jose or driving from Pleasanton to Oakland? I mean, I don't understand the mechanics of how that's done with any accuracy.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a little bit more technical than I might be able to answer for you. We had Rincon consultant team help us with those calculations, and there's a modeling program that they use, and it's a standard model that's used across all of the cities for these, and it has a very specific calculation of how they get there. It's in one of the documents on our website, and we can note that we'd like Rincon to speak to that, and I can get back to you. But it's a little bit more technical than I might be able to answer on this call right now.
Well, Megan, with all due respect, you're a professional and you're dealing with this essentially on a daily basis. So your skill set is to be respected. But if it's difficult for you to understand, how in the world do laymen like city council members understand it?
Fair, and I think what I meant is that I might need to look into that document that we put together a few months ago and find the answer for you. It is based on a modeling system, and so I can look into that while we're on this call, or I can circle back with you at the end, but I can get an answer for you.
Okay, well, let's remember that ultimately you're making a report to city council members who have to make decisions that affect a lot of people for a long time. So at the end of the day, they have to understand it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other initial questions before Megan dives into her priority items for the business community? Arnie, you're muted there, Chief.
Yeah, I like David pointed out, I don't have any problem with trying to rank all of this and hang values on these various programs. But I would direct you to page 3 of the Cascadia package here, which lists the criteria for judging each of these action items. And I have a problem with only assigning businesses 0.1 out of 100 in terms of level of support. I think that really communicates that business doesn't really matter here. Doesn't matter what, effectively, it doesn't matter what the chamber thinks. So I would argue that that item needs to be increased. Now, under cost, we reference cost to the community. A big part of the community is business, but I really believe that if this is going to go to our present city council, we need to increase the weighting that we give business on all of this as far as input and effect on our businesses, most of which are small businesses that are coming off a really tough year. So that's what I have to say at this point.
Yeah, Arnie. Vera, did you want to comment at this point, or? There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, I guess I'm mostly listening, but the little bit of reading that I've done on this, there's one thing that kind of sticks out, that in order to get things like this, any big changes in the way people, I guess, act, that they kind of need to be enabled. And one of the big examples that I remember is that the auto market, back in when cars were invented and Ford and GM were going at it. I think it was GM that got a huge leg up because they started offering financing. And the same thing happened. I know David probably has the history better, but I think that the home sales really, took off when home financing became a thing. So rather than sticking, the consumer, I guess I'm looking at the carrots instead of the stick, because that is generally what'll, entice people to come along. And so the idea, and this isn't necessarily something that the city has the wherewithal necessarily to, be the agent in. And so I don't know if it's more a matter of trying to get California to get together to provide more of this kind of, financing for all of these kind of changes that you're actually wanting to support, rather than coming up with goals that are higher than the state is already kind of, requiring. The other thing that's kind of interesting is to look for change agents. A lot of people will do all kinds of seemingly crazy things because somebody that they're following on, social media or whatnot. And your idea of having those two they're not convection, they're induction stoves that people can borrow, that's a really great idea. And I just wonder if you couldn't get some local chef that's kind of an in personality to make a big deal, and you could get people to want to follow this rather than be looking for loopholes about how not to follow it. Okay, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would just like to add, hi Vera, I'm Zach Rada, I'm a management analyst with the city, and I'm helping with this plan. That East Bay Community Energy, which is the alternative electricity provider that we are joining, they actually are doing a restaurant campaign where they're doing videos with local chefs using induction cooktops. So I can share that with you, and I think that's a great idea, and maybe we can start sharing that on our own social media as well once we start lending the induction cooktops to residents.
Sounds great. Okay, I will mute.
Speaking of restaurants, one of my concerns throughout the Bay Area is this move to eliminate natural gas connections. First of all, there's a major difference in expense between natural gas and electricity. Second of all, we have hundreds of thousands of buildings that are already constructed with natural gas energy, or at least partial natural gas energy, particularly restaurants. And as we start mandating changes, these changes in older buildings, existing buildings, get to be very, very expensive. And small business has a really hard time making ends meet with all of these mandated changes. And I could give you several examples, including trash enclosures. But one of my concerns is that as consultant reports are written, number one, they tend to narrow their focus only on the issue that they're addressing and not look at other issues such as eliminating natural gas. Well, they forget about the cost to the hundreds of thousands of buildings that are already built with natural gas. The other thing is that they don't take into consideration an overall impact and conflicts with other public policies. To give an example, in our first iteration of climate, we were using a 1990s base year instead of something like 1974, when air pollution was really bad out here. So they upped the base year to the 90s when it had already improved substantially. Another thing that consultant reports did then is they wanted to reduce on-site parking. Well, the city of Pleasanton since the 1960s has tried to emphasize on-site parking and reduce, and in many cases, eliminating street parking. Yet that climate consultant only wanted to, he wanted to increase the footprints on properties, increase the density, and go to more on-street parking. And then they wanted to require that everybody ride a bicycle to work 1 day a week or 1 day a month. Well, that consultant kind of forgets that 75% of the people that work in Pleasanton do not live in Pleasanton. So as these consultant reports come down from on high, it's really important that the overall impact on business and residents, for that matter, are taken into account. Having said all of that, maintaining or trying to control our climate and improve our climate is in everybody's best interest, and we all want to do it. But I think it's going to be a lot more effective with carrots rather than sticks. Thank you.
Steve, can I jump in here for a second?
Oh, certainly, yeah. It's open forum.
So just to kind of reset the tone here, the process is you've got a very large menu, and we've lumped them into, these have promise for success and these other ones don't. And the ones that we think have promise for success, we're going to evaluate in a much deeper way. So more quantitative analysis, a much deeper dive. Part of that analysis is cost benefit. And so everybody understands that some of this stuff is going to cost money. Nobody's recommending anything yet. And so there's sort of a tone of attacking our consultants and a direction we're going. We haven't gone in any direction yet. So all that information, who's going to get hurt financially, is forthcoming. And so then we have to make some decisions. And wouldn't it be great if we could get a qualified climate action plan with carrots and voluntary action? But the reality is, most likely, it becomes a mathematical equation. There will be a quantitative effectiveness assigned to each action, and it's got to add up to a target. Otherwise, if we don't meet the goal, we don't get a qualified cap, and it doesn't work for CEQA and all these other things. So yes, there are going to be some hard choices. Staff's not going to recommend any more than the bare minimum to get to the numbers we need to. But the assumptions that you can make about how effective your carrots are going to make are going to result in will be much less than doing something definitive. Same with voluntary. I mean, you can't just assume you're going to have huge success on a voluntary motion. So there are certain things, hopefully the least painful of all of them, that are likely to be mandatory. And once we decide which ones those are, I think it's okay to, criticize them, question them, talk about them, but we're not really there yet. So.
And well, Brian, I mean, I don't think anybody's attacking your consultant. I think these are just longtime Pleasanton residents who are being very frank, and we've all known each other for a long time, and hopefully you'd understand that this is just the result of us being frank and honest. Where I struggle a little bit is in looking at climate action plans and consultant work and staff work, not just in Pleasanton, but in many other communities, is there's this and I don't like the term pseudoscience, but the sort of mishmash of a little bit of theoretical, a little bit of empirical, a little bit of, well, this works in Berkeley or San Francisco or wherever, on some of these measures. So there's going to be a leap of faith in all this stuff. My point is that I would not outright dismiss the effectiveness of voluntary, considering the philosophical and ideological changes that are happening within this community. The challenge and the opportunity that you have in this cap is capturing what's already been done on a voluntary basis. And that includes the products that people are able to buy right now. For instance, low flow toilets. I don't know where you can buy a non-low flow toilet these days. So given the resources that you have on this, maybe take a little different approach to what methodology is out there to capture the effectiveness of voluntary things. Because as much as the ideology I alluded to has changed in this town, there are still going to be residents who don't buy into this, who don't believe in this, and are probably going to be pretty enthusiastic at taking a run at some of these things. And we know that the culture of City Hall is to address resident concerns. I'm bringing up the realtor concerns early in the process so that your bandwidth isn't taken up with fighting fights that could be eliminated early on. And I understand everything that's being discussed is just advisory, but it wouldn't be, as a stakeholder, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't identify early those potential stumbling blocks that, as I mentioned earlier, could take up a whole bunch of bandwidth that could be spent on other things. So
I appreciate that.
Being frank and honest, it's not an attack. It's just we've kind of been through this before a few times. So let's just eliminate some things that we know are going to cause some problems.
But let's also be realistic about what effectiveness we can assume on a voluntary measure. I mean, we will max out that assumption, but at a certain point, it just gets ridiculous and we can't count it and we're not going to get qualified.
Okay, then I would encourage you, Brian, on the mandates. Please have scientifically defensible evidence of what the mandates are going to do in terms of GHG reductions.
We will have the best methodologies that are available. And to your point about it's pseudoscience.
And I didn't want to use that term because I know that it's got it. But on a Friday at noon, my already limited vocabulary gets even more limited. But you see what I was saying? It's just,
well, I understand. I mean, this stuff hasn't been around forever. It's not part of everybody's vocabulary. But I understand why people might question how certain actions translate, and we will have the best support that is available. Are we gonna satisfy every doubter? No, but we've got a good group on board. They've been doing these things, and it'll be a balancing act. We won't be able to prove everything to everybody, but we'll do the best effort possible.
Well, Brian, I think where David is going is the more that we can collaborate and partner and agree, the better off everybody is and the better the chances for success. The last thing that any of us want is mandated controls that are not well thought out and don't work, and the city doesn't accomplish their objective. And worse than that, our climate doesn't improve. That's where we're all trying to go. So I think if initial reports are constructively challenged and better information is thought through, the better decisions will be made that will benefit everybody so that we can all cooperate.
Arnie, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Brian, I agree that we've got an awful lot on the plate here. My question is, why wouldn't we just at this point eliminate all of the low priority actions? Just take them off the list.
That's essentially what the suggestion is. I mean, but we wanted to have the opportunity. You're not the only group of people that we're talking to. There are other interested parties. They're on there so that everybody knows what we started with. And if there's somebody who really thinks that something that we're going to set aside because it doesn't look that promising, they have another idea, we're willing to listen. But
Okay.
essentially, I don't really like the high priority, low priority terminology. To me, it's more promising, not so promising, in terms of effectiveness. And so, unless we hear something from everyone we talk to about those low priority ones, we're not going to spend the time to do cost benefit analysis on them.
Okay.
And equally,
Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
yeah, and equally, if there's items that are on the, what was your word, Brian? The more
Promising and not promising.
more promising list, and there's consensus or broad agreement that those are just not measures that the community is supportive of, that the business community doesn't support, they can come off the list as well. That's the purpose of this process and outreach phase right now, is to really have that broad conversation, talk to as many people as we can, and take off the list the things that there's not enough support for.
And that was correct, Brian. And we really wanted to bring it to you early to have these conversations before we sort of bake in the promising actions and allow this discussion. So that's why we're here.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you being here. David, go ahead.
Yeah, and this just entered my walnut-sized brain, and I want to capture it before it leaves. Is there a method is there any kind of a mechanism out there for Pleasanton residents to say log in how their commute patterns have changed, and maybe establish a database to update some of these VMT calculations based on COVID and based on what the world's going to look like post-COVID? And I mention this because, I mean, that's the elephant in the room, is VMTs. And I think that would be maybe this is an opportunity to bring in, researcher from wherever. If you're looking for a grant partner on that, we might be able to provide some resources through the National Association of Realtors to come up with an online widget, saying, hey, I don't anticipate doing my commute like I did last time a consultant did this analysis. I don't know if ABAG MTC has done anything like that. But as far as something that could really put Pleasanton on the map is being creative and looking at this and going back to my mention of how do you capture the voluntary actions? If you could capture the voluntary actions related to auto use, that's going to move the needle.
Auto use and public transportation use as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's a good point. And we've been having these monthly calls with other cities that are updating their caps, and we've all been talking about that issue. How is COVID really going to change these emissions analyses that we've all completed? Because it will change it in some way. The answer is we don't know how much it'll change it and in what ways it'll change it quite yet. We can see patterns, but we can't really calculate it quite yet. So I think it's a really interesting point to think if we can get creative and come up with a tool. I don't think that one exists quite yet. I know that that everyone is looking at this, and there will be a way to update our emissions somewhere down the road. So I'll add that as a note.
You have a huge opportunity here to reach out to the school district and see if someone in a STEAM program, talk about an initiative that would check a whole bunch of boxes. I'm just thinking about, we are a 2-car family, and the battery in one of our cars has died multiple times over the last few months. And our experience—
From lack of use.
From lack of use.
From lack of use, yeah.
Right. We have ours plugged into the wall, on a trickle charge because we had the same issue. This is a good note. I'm going to see if we can look into adding an action that that covers that, you know, partnering and maybe developing a tool where we can track
And you know,
that.
and almost to track it in real time, you know,
Mhm.
and going back to Jan's point, you know, earlier about, you know, transportation is the key to this thing. Yeah, of course, buildings are a thing, but if you could take a chunk out of that, then.
David, in some respects, we do. We conduct annual traffic counts throughout the city as part of our monitoring of, you know, just the functioning of the city's roads, and that sort of modeling, because it's done consistently year on year, will actually, you know, ultimately track real world changes in people's travel behavior. We already know, of course, over the past year that we've seen a lot less volumes. You can see it in your driving around town, right? A lot less volumes of people on the roads, and whether that continues into the future. You know, I think it's something that is of interest to lots of people, as Megan was saying, and something the city will be tracking as well.
So Ellen,
The traffic volume is picking up now.
Your baseline, and again, I apologize, your baseline for this cap cycle is not, does it include changes in VMT since COVID, or is it based on a
Not yet.
Okay, so just heads up. I mean, I can see this one coming from a long way away on the weekly blog. You know, someone jumping on that. I mean, there are enough smarty smarts in this town that someone's going to jump on that. So again, another one of those things you may want to get ahead of. So
I think it's going to be pretty easy to document the difference between pre-COVID and now, but figuring out what should be assumed for 5 to 10 years down the road, that's where we need to put our heads together and you know, with other people that are struggling with the same thing and taking that into effect.
Megan, is there a monitoring piece that happens relative to the emissions inventory in the future? I can't remember if that's part of the.
There is. Yeah, there is. Thank you for bringing that up. So as part of this, we're going to put together an implementation and monitoring plan, and the monitoring piece of it is essentially going to be a tool where we can track in real time as we implement these actions, or as there's uptick in, let's say, people changing out, you know, their cooktops or whatever it is, somehow a way for us to track and monitor what the city's actually doing, what the community's doing, what the businesses are doing, so that we can see how our emissions are changing over time, as opposed to kind of every 10 years doing an inventory and saying, okay, where are we at this point in time? So we're hoping to build in a better way to really monitor this stuff over time. And really get credit for all of those things you were mentioning, David, that people are doing, and acknowledging that people are doing them, and tracking that. So that is built into this process as something that we're going to do.
And we would be happy to partner with you on that in terms of promoting. You know, people love to brag about their new windows. Well, then, hey, brag about your gap ceiling and your new insulation. I mean, that's harder to put on Facebook, although I did a number of years ago. But still, you know, let's play to the baser instincts of our residents. You know, here's an opportunity to show off all the swell things you've done. Meanwhile, we're putting that in the spreadsheet.
Right.
I'm just diabolical that way. Brian, I see that smirk. Okay, I see these things that are happening. Okay.
I'm going to turn my video off.
Well, I know this is a little informal, but I think it's been great from the comments. Hopefully, Megan, are you getting what you need? Do you need more from us in this group, or I know you're going to have several other meetings that are coming up. So just.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. I really appreciate the feedback. I know it's early in the process, and maybe too early in some regards, because we don't have that cost benefit analysis that everyone's asking for, and we'll get there. We really just wanted to make sure you had an early opportunity for these types of comments, so we could understand, you know, what's the stance of the business community on these things. So I feel like we're getting that. We went to the Economic Vitality Committee yesterday, and is it yesterday? I don't even know what day of the week it is. Yesterday, I think.
7:30 in the morning.
Everything's blending together. And we have a number of meetings next week as well, including a community workshop. And so we're trying to get the word out there. And if you know people that would want to attend the workshop, if you want to attend the workshop, it's next Thursday at 5:30. We've shared the link, happy to do it again on this chat, but really just the more the early feedback we can get, the better the plan will be in the long run. So you'll see things change, and we'll report your feedback, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you for asking us. And the more groups you can talk to early, the more constructive feedback you'll get early, and then you can build it in. You know, one of the worst things that can happen is creating a model that doesn't work, because in order to reach conclusions, everybody creates models. So you want the model to be as accurate and as thoroughly thought through as you can. But thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Question.
Arnie, you had a hand up.
One last question, this for the consultant. And going to the point that was made by Brian, we need an acceptable cap. I mean, that's where we're headed. We've got to have a cap that the state will approve. Can I look at these high priority actions in here? Are these, in the consultant's opinion, are these items that win points with the state as far as developing an acceptable cap?
Yeah.
It's not really points, it's what reductions can you attribute to them and justify. And I don't think it's not the state either, right? It's the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Is that
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's for CEQA, you need to be able to have quantifiable measures. So, you know, if we want it to be qualified, we need to have a number of actions that we can actually point to and calculate the GHG emissions off of. So we're trying to come up with a list here that is going to get us a qualified cap, that is quantifiable, that is going to move the needle on our GHGs and really get us to our target.
Yeah, they don't care which ones you pick as long as you meet the number.
And you can track and measure, you know, and show that you're meeting the number, so that if the Bay Area Air Quality Management District were to call us out, we can point to these actions and say, look, we're doing them, and here's how it's affected our GHG emissions. And then that way we can use the cap for CEQA streamlining for development applications and stuff that come in.
If we can get there with the easy ones, believe me, that's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Arnie or Vera, Jan, David, Brad?
I have one more comment, and it seems to me, again, I have a feeble brain like David does, but to track the trips, I'm talking about transportation and the emissions, it seems that a simple questionnaire, and we have brilliant students that live in this town that might be able to customize it better for Pleasanton than even a consultant does, is if you know the car, is it a gas car, is it a electric car, or the hybrid, and how often do you enter the freeway to go to work? Is it 2 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week? And you can track it that way, just like you track how many people use the parks in Pleasanton, and literally get an exact number for the emissions that we generate, that we do, and what we don't generate by the pass-through traffic.
Origin and destination studies.
Yeah, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to send out a questionnaire and say, how many days a week do you enter the freeway? You know, because we don't enter the freeway at all in this house.
Well, Jan, one of the blessings and curses of our modern reliance on cell phones and wireless and all of these things is that apps like Waze and Google Maps are collecting locational data all the time from many of us while we're driving around, and that information is being used to help to support the sort of data modeling that you're talking about, because it's tracking literal trips from your.
Okay, so Ellen, are you telling me you know where I go every day?
I don't know where you go, but in broad, in broad aggregation, there is a lot of data out there in the world about the way that people travel from place to place in their daily lives. So big data is a little scary, but does provide some value in terms of real world information.
Yeah, there's no privacy anymore, is there?
Less and less.
So one last question. I keep coming up with this. When Bay Area Air Quality looks at our cap, do they tie any of this to the amount of jobs that exist in Pleasanton? Does anybody know?
I mean, I think only as it relates to how many trips we generate.
Yeah, I was going to say, as it relates to our emissions, so our emissions inventory, it takes into account jobs and population, but it doesn't necessarily change how our emissions are. Like when they look at our plan, they're looking at, are we implementing our actions? They're not necessarily checking in on that job number and the population number, if that makes sense.
But don't you think, Megan, that the square footage of office and other commercial is also part of the base? I mean, it would affect the equation in that way.
Yeah, so it affects that emissions inventory in the very beginning step, but not necessarily what they're looking at as to if we're meeting our cap. They're just looking at, are we implementing the measures in the cap like we said we would, and are our GHGs changing?
Well, let me give you the reason why I bring this up.
Yeah.
We have this problem with housing, and we look at jobs, and based on jobs, we have to have X amount of housing. And we don't get credit for the fact that a lot of our jobs are filled with individuals who don't live here, and many of whom commute here on BART or by rail. And I've always had a problem with that. So that's why I'm asking with respect to the cap.
Yeah, I think it's more indirect than direct, as Megan and Brian were saying. It's either about square footage of commercial buildings that we have of different types that generate, individually sort of broad amounts of emissions, as well as the travel and transportation piece and how people travel and where they come from. So clearly, yeah, if people have more ability to live near to where they work, then you would hope that those trips get shorter. But how do people travel is also important as well.
They can't afford to live here, then they're going to be living somewhere else and commuting in. So it's
Gosh, this almost sounds like grounds for a lawsuit. Oops, sorry. Is that too soon? Too soon.
Off topic.
Yeah, sorry. Hey, Megan, is the agenda for your workshop already set?
Set as in publicly posted somewhere?
No, like, I mean, who's speaking and who's making the presentations and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'll be there. Zach will be there. Ellen will be there. Our consultant team will be there. And we plan to give an overview of the process to date, kind of where we're at. We plan to do some polling questions. We plan to have some breakout rooms where we actually break up by topic and really get into some of the discussion on some of the topics.
And reason I'm asking is that having been to many of these, the more that you can make it Pleasanton specific.
Yep.
Here's what the situation is in Pleasanton. Here are some things that are being suggested because we believe they will work in Pleasanton. Again, just letting you know about a potential speed bump pain point.
Thank you. Noted.
Okay. Anything else from our intimate group here?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This was
Thank you for
not
the
too early.
opportunity.
Really,
Really-
really appreciate it.
Really appreciate you being here, Brian, Ellen, Megan, and Zach. Thank you so much. I know this is our second. We got two with you, so we appreciate it. And I hope it was helpful. And I know there's many more coming. And we're like, I think Brad, you said it perfectly. We want it to be successful and not a detriment to the city, obviously. So we're here to help if we can. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
take care. Have a
Thank you.
good weekend.
Stay
Thank
healthy,
you.
y'all.
All right,
Bye.
take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.